So on this holiday weekend, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my community, maybe spread some love and light. And when I say my community, I'm referring to the LGBTQIA plus, whatever it is. I can't understand why a demographic of people, a community that boasts so many people of artistic talent and sensitivity has come up with such an appalling thing to call itself. That's not what this video is about. But it's a point, really. I mean, we can't even decide what letters should be included, what order they should be in. We can't even decide what some of the letters even stand for. What's the Q stand for? Some people will tell you, oh, that stands for queer. Right, well, queer doesn't really mean any one of us. Queer is just sort of out of the ordinary, isn't it? So doesn't that kind of encompass all of us? I've often said that queer should be the default name of our community. I mean, I know a lot of people were abused with that word back in 19 but I think for most younger people growing up now, it's a word that we can reclaim. It can refer to all of us. And it's much nicer, isn't it? Queer community. LGBTIQA plus. People who say it's the Q also stands for questioning. So apparently, if you've ever had a youthful experimentation in college, you can consider yourself part of this community. No, you can't. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about the I. The I in that horrific acronym stands for intersex. And the reason I want to talk about it is because it has been such a taboo subject for so long that I think there's very little awareness out there of what this actually means. For a lot of people who have some sense of what intersex refers to, they might think of it as similar to the term hermaphrodite. Hermaphrodite is a word, incidentally, that people who are intersex often take great offense at being called. So just so you know, it's not really a safe word to use with people anymore. I've more or less taken it out of my vocabulary altogether, except for just mentioning it here. And that would be my recommendation to you too. But just to give you some point of reference, if that's a word you're familiar with, this is sort of in that ballpark. I think part of the reason that word is not liked so much anymore is because it pathologizes this situation. It makes it a clinical diagnosis rather than a person. Same reason I don't particularly like being called that homosexual, because homosexual isn't a person, it's a diagnosis. Anyway. Intersex, what is it? So intersex just basically means anybody who is born with a body that doesn't strictly conform to male or female gender. And that could be because the person is born with both sets of genitalia. It might be because they were born with differently formed genitalia that don't look conventional. It might be that they were born with a chromosomal difference. It could be something that's not visible, but which has altered their body in some way that makes it fall outside of the strict categories of male and female. Now that might sound, oh, that sounds a lot like trans, and there are some similarities, but the heart of trans is the transformation. It's the change from one thing to another. Whereas with intersex, these people are what they have always been. They were born this way. And it's not super common. It's not necessarily rare. I think the more visible types of intersex that you would think of, the differently formed genitalia, for example, is pretty unusual. You only see that about once every 2,000 live births. But intersex actually covers a wide variety of it can manifest itself in many different ways. In fact, at the moment, they estimate there's about 40 different types of intersex. And the reason for that is because and here comes the science bit, when a fetus is forming in the womb, when it's gestating in there, they all start off as female. That's sort of the blueprint, the template. Those babies that are eventually going to become boys, at about 6 weeks, will start to differentiate. They will start to develop testes at 6 weeks. And then roughly at about 9 weeks, I think, babies that are going to be boys will start to develop the penis. What would have been the clitoris starts to form into the penis. And you also get those structural differences in the brain. When I did the short video on transgender before. I talked about that there are some structural differences in the brains of men and women. Those start to appear at about 9 weeks of gestation. So the transformation from a female fetus into a male fetus doesn't happen all at once. It's a process that occurs. It's influenced by their genes. It's influenced by the hormones in the mother's body. So it's a complicated process that occurs over a period of time. And anything that interferes with that process at any point in this can create a different manifestation of intersex. So the problem is, or has been, that historically, and you might be thinking, how is this as common as that? In fact, I was going to say, they estimate in the UK that about 130 babies are born every year that are intersex, while the differently formed genitalia is a fairly small number, and that 1 out of every 2,000 babies. The intersex category generally is estimated at as high as 2%. So it could be as many as 1 out of every 50 children have some manifestation of this phenomenon. And again, sometimes it's not visible. Where the problems come in is for a lot of these children, when they are born with, they're met with confusion. Medical personnel can't tell whether they are male or female. We think about babies always being born with a penis or a vagina, but that's not always the case. So when a baby is born that is not immediately differentiated, you can't tell whether it's boy or girl. What has historically happened is that they've picked one and just gone with it. And that means that if they decide, okay, well, this baby, I can't quite tell if it's male or female. I think on balance, probably female, so let's chop those testes off. Let's remove this small penis, and let's raise the child as a girl. And there was a theory at one time that children could be raised as either gender. It didn't matter. They were basically a blank slate. If you started them off as a girl and raised them as a girl, they'd be fine as a woman when they grow older. But sadly, that's not the case. And a lot of people have these operations only to discover as they hit puberty and as they hit adolescence that sometimes those choices made in the early moments of their lives were the wrong choices. And tremendous suffering and mental health issues can arise as a result of having your body altered in the wrong direction. I don't know if you can imagine feeling that kind of gender. I mean, I suppose it would be confusion at one stage before you understood really what was happening, only to discover that you had at one stage the genitals that you thought you should, but that they'd removed them. Anyway, there's a lot of really sad stories about people who've gone through hell over this because people don't understand. What they're trying to encourage now is that if you have a baby who's born that way, best just to leave them alone until they reach an age where it becomes clear which way their body is taking them, whether it's heading towards growing a beard or growing breasts. Because if you've chopped off their penis and they start growing a beard, that's probably a good indication you've made the wrong choice. So I hope that this will clarify a little bit what intersex is. It's just people who don't fit neatly into either category, not because of any personal views or choices they've made, but just the fact that they were born with a combination of factors and a combination of characteristics that doesn't fit the conventional mold. Where do they fit in society? Well, they fit in the LGBTQIA+ community, because if we